I'm traveling from Washington, D.C. to Boston to visit my parents, whom I haven't seen in over 16 months due to COVID. My dad, who turns 94 in 6 months, has been talking for years about writing his memoirs, but never got around to it. I decided to bring my camera on this trip to record the story of his life, not just for me and my siblings, but for his grandchildren, and especially his great-grandchildren, whom are too young to understand all that he went through. This is for my father. This is his story.
I'm Howard Luckett, and here I am with my son, Jonathan, my wife, Esther, and it's Father's Day, 2021. I think the date is June the 20th, and Jonathan is visiting for a week, and it's just absolutely great having him here, and we're going to talk about everything.
So, how old are you?
Well, I'm 93 now. Did I say that? And I'll be 94 in December.
Wow. So, I'm really interested in hearing about where you grew up and about your mom and dad and just any early memories you may remember.
Well, I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, a little town on the Gulf of Mexico, and we lived, of course, back in those days in very, very segregated communities. But when I was a little boy, like all little boys, my world was limited, and you only relate to, your little world and what interests you. So I had what I would consider a kind of a normal childhood, doing everything that all little kids would do, hiding under the bed and playing with makeshift cars and building toys and, looking forward to holidays and so on. Playing under the house where it was cool. Mobile was very hot and humid, so to get away from the heat, I would play, and my favorite place was under the house. Our house was built on a brick foundation. It was about maybe 3 feet high, which is perfect for a little boy to crawl under and play with my toys and my pet rooster, my pet bantam. Don't remember if it was a rooster or not. But that was my childhood. I remember my earliest memories of sitting on the back porch, and I think I had the mumps, and my mother had tied some, what is it you tie around? I think she put fat. That was I think one of the treatments, something on my jaws, and then they tied mutton, something around me. I don't remember, but it was supposed to have cured mumps. Apparently it worked, because here I am.
90 years later.
Yeah, right.
Do you remember what your street looked like?
I do. We lived on Congress Street, and it was a street with not all, but mostly railroad flats. You'd enter a front door, a porch, front door, and there was a living room, bedroom, and there was a room behind that, and then a room behind that was a kitchen, and then there was some a little side room, and some closets and so on, and then the back porch, and then an outhouse in back, and a garden.
So you didn't have a bathroom in the house?
We did not. We did not.
Was that typical of the
It
homes?
was, not at all unusual, although some of my neighbors did. One of my next door neighbors did have a bathroom, but the one next to that neighbor did not, and the one next to that neighbor did not, and certainly the one on the other side of me didn't. Whereas the ones on across the street, two of them did. So it varied depending on, your economic status.
And were your neighbors mostly black, all black?
They were all black. They were all black. It was a ghetto. We were confined. There was no mobility in Mobile where we lived. I mean, some neighborhood you could consider, I don't know, some better than others. I don't know if I did. I'm thinking back where all of my friends lived, and their neighborhoods weren't any better than my neighborhood, but some of their homes were better.
So you used the word ghetto. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, yes. Because
what does that mean in terms of the way you lived in your family?
It means that there was no way out. We were all black. People were confined to a section of Mobile, sections of Mobile. Some were, as I said, a little better than others, I guess, and but not very much so. There was no mobility. You were confined.
There's something you said that I was going to save till later, but you mentioned a rooster or a chicken, and I have to mention this because, as you know, when I was a little boy growing up in Brooklyn, we actually raised a chicken, or I raised a chicken as a science project.
Right,
so
exactly.
I don't think I ever knew that you had a rooster growing up as a little boy.
And it wasn't a rooster.
Okay.
It was a little bantam chicken, little hen, and it was my favorite pet. But not for long. It's one morning I went to check on my pet, and it was killed, or a rodent of some sort had killed it.
Oh, wow.
And eaten its head off, really, and it traumatized me.
How old were you?
I don't know, I was maybe, I'm going to say 4 or 5 years old.
How did you get the pet?
From my mother, my parents, we had some chickens, and I just adopted one of the babies. I want this one for myself. My mom said, okay. And so I took care of it. That was my pet. And so I raised it, and I kept it under the house in a little nest, I think, by the fireplace. And came in one morning, and it had been killed. And again, it just traumatized me. And for years, and I think still, I don't like stuffed animals, particularly stuffed birds, because they bring back memories of my dead chicken, that I was so fond of. But,
did you have other animals? Can you describe, was there a backyard?
There was a backyard, but we didn't have other animals. I remember vaguely some relative coming to visit, maybe my aunt, bringing a dog with her from Mississippi, from Jackson. But just vague memories of a type of a little dog. But I don't have any other memories of owning a dog then.
What did most of the people in your neighborhood do for work? or did they work?
They did. They all worked. They did different things. Like my father. My father was a laborer. He worked on the docks, first of all. He worked on the Mobile docks. He worked for the shipyard. And later on, he worked for the Gulf, Mobile, and Ohio Railroad, GM&O, where he became a switchman. First, he would lay cross tires, and then he later became a switchman, that is, repairing switches that would, move the train from one track to another. And my other neighbors, one, he was a porter on the railroad, and his route was between Mobile and New Orleans. And another neighbor that I recall worked at the shipyard. Some of my younger neighbors were merchant shipmen, and so they went all over the world. And then, of course, one neighbor across the street, two of them, husband and wife, they were medical doctors.
Oh, okay.
And next to them was a businessman. He dealt in resin that's, taken from pine trees. And I remember he had trucks that he would haul these huge pine trees. So he was a businessman and so on. And he owned a house that he lived in, which was a large house. And he rented to the doctors who were next to them. And I believe to the people who were next to them. So he owned property. He owned several houses on our particular block.
And so even though he was a businessman and you said your neighbors across the street were doctors, they still lived in the ghetto.
Absolutely. We had another doctor whose son was a very, very close friend of mine. I think I remember mentioning to you, he went to school at, what's that school out at where Obi lives?
That was Powhatan?
Yeah, there's that school. Oh, God, I can't. Something Academy. What was that academy? And Obi knew about it, and Obi
Okay.
Jr. knew about it. When I mentioned, I said, was this, St. Emma's. St. Emma's. He went to St. Emma's. His father was a doctor. As a matter of fact, you know about the Green Book. Blacks couldn't stay at hotels and so on. The Franklins, that was their name, their house was one of the places where people like Marian Anderson, and she did stay there at the Franklin's house because she couldn't stay at hotels and motels.
So it was one of the homes that were listed
Right.
in the Green Book.
And I'm told, so to answer your question, even the upward mobility, people who could afford to move into different places could not, because at the time, don't forget, this was, I was born in the 20s and I grew up in the 30s. So I'm memorizing what I'm talking to you now about was in the 30s, the early 40s and so on.
Right.
And we were limited. And don't forget, even, were you born then? When I went back to Mobile, after living in New York, I couldn't stay at places. And so I would drive continuously from New York to Mobile, without
Straight.
stopping, just stopping for gas, no food or anything, because I would pack a lunch before, and then I would drive straight through.
And that was in 1960.
This was in after I came out of I guess I'd come out of the Marine Corps then, before, but late 50s, early 60s, sure, absolutely.
So getting back to what kind of work people did your mom, did women work back then?
Yes, they
in the 30s?
had to work, they did. My mom was a domestic. She was an excellent cook and baker, and she worked all of her life doing just that, cooking and baking for a white family that I knew at one time but have no knowledge except what I remember my mom telling me and what's written in this little book that she recorded. You saw it, I think. You'll have to look at it again while you're here. This family. And she'd take me to work with her when I was a little boy.
And how far away was that?
I don't remember, but it
was
was walking distance.
Okay.
But we lived not too far, just a couple of blocks, really. I'm going to say 2.5 blocks, if that, from the white section of town where you would divide. That was the dividing line, Spring Hill Avenue. And on the, I'm going to say if I have my bearings right, south of that was the white section, and the north of that was the colored section, so to speak. And we would do most of our shopping right there at that dividing line. We would go there for fresh fruits and vegetables. We'd go there for our pharmacy needs. There was also an A&P there where we shopped. We could do that.
And was that store, that grocery store, was that for primarily or just for blacks?
No. Whites and blacks could shop there.
Okay.
Just as whites and blacks could shop at that pharmacy, whites and blacks could shop at that A&P that we would go to. But blacks could not go to a school that was just a block or so away from that, or 2
In the
blocks
white
away.
section.
Yeah, in that white. It was in the white section. It would have been convenient for me, much closer to me going to that school than going to the school I went to. Of course, that was out of a question.
Right. In your neighborhood, did you see white people on a regular basis?
I did, because from a half a block from our house, literally half a block, was a store that was run by a white couple, and we would go there and shop also. If we wanted, for example, let's say my mom wanted a can of pet milk, that's evaporated milk, pet milk, that was a brand name, pet milk. If she needed pet milk for coffee or for cooking, would you go to Kevin's? That was the name of the store.
She'd send you to...
Yeah, would you go to, we call it Kevan's, I guess it was pronounced, we pronounced Mr. Kevan. Mr. Kevan, I want a can of pet milk, or I want half a pound of flour, whatever, or a stick of butter, that sort of thing, whatever you needed at the moment, we would go there.
So can you talk a little bit more about your mom and dad? Obviously, my immediate family knows I'm 61 years old, and I never got to meet my grandmother and my grandfather. But I want to hear about your parents.
Okay. Well, first of all, I admired them so very much, especially after, in retrospect, when you're growing up, they're your parents, and and you have your own interest and so on. You don't think about, your parents being great and this, they discipline you. But in retrospect, when I think of them, and I admire them so much, and I just wish I could say to them now, thank you, I admire you, I love you, because they were just so strong, and they had to be, of course, and not just my parents, but all of the parents, they had to adopt and to survive and raise a family in a very, very restrictive, prejudice, frightening environment when you look back on it. Again, when you're young, you're protected by your family, and they keep a lot of stuff from you. So I was lucky in the sense that I had a family, and all of us had families like that, who protected us. Not only did we have the family, but you had neighbors who also kept an eye on you. That was one advantage, I think, of living in close proximity to your neighbors. They kind of kept an eye on you. Of course, they told your parents things that you didn't want your parents to know. So you had neighbors, and you also had the church, which also provided one of the things. I grew up a Catholic, as you know, and so I had the nuns and the priests, and they provided also cover for what was going on. So, but again, back to my parents, they didn't have that. They were exposed to whatever was out there. They were on the outer edge of the wagon, and so they protected us from the wolves. So they were the strong ones. And when I think of my father, for example, and I'm going to ask you maybe to help me research this, I've been trying to find out this. My father worked on the docks, I told you that. And I know that at one point, I'm not sure when, but I'm old enough to remember this, and it stayed with me, is one morning I heard, I don't know, from one of my siblings or from my mother, that my father had taken his revolver to work to the docks. And in retrospect, I remember, whoa, that was when the white people, and this is what it needs researching, resented the fact that black people either had come in to replace them because they were striking for higher wages and they hired black workers. Either that, or they were simply protesting black workers working on the docks beside them. And it could be both, because both things happened during those times. They didn't want black workers working on the docks, unloading stuff coming into the ports and all that. They didn't want that. They didn't want them working on railroads and so on. So, but this is a thing that my father faced. He would get up, and I remember this because I was old enough to remember it. He would get up every morning before dawn. It would be dark, and I remember him dressing and everything and getting ready, having breakfast. And I remember him going to work, and I remember going from my bed and snuggling with my mom in her bed before she got up to, go to work and so on. And I remember him coming home late in the evening. And the same with my mom. My mom would go to work, and she would work all day, and she'd come home late in the evening. So both of them would come home late in the evening. And then, of course, they would have to prepare food for us. And I'm saying that this was really, 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 really rough on them. And then on weekends, my father would often have them to work a half day, So that the only time he could relax would be Saturday afternoon and then Sunday. But then Saturday afternoon, there was chores to be done. We would have to, cut wood for the fire. We'd have to go shopping for food, or if I had medical needs or dental needs, or not only just me, but my younger brother, he'd have to do it, and so on. And my mother was just going constantly, keeping house for us as well as for the people she worked with. And it was just my recollection, it was non-stop, making up the bed, cleaning, washing in her big pot in the backyard. Can you visualize a big, huge black pot? And you would build a fire under it, and then they would heat the water, and then you would put the clothes in there, and that's how they would wash,
So did you not have electricity?
We did not. We never had electricity when I was growing up. Never. So one of my jobs when I was growing up was filling the lamp with kerosene. Kerosene has a horrible smell, by the way. It'd get on your head. I hated it, but it was my job,
Right.
my task, and that was what I was tasked to do, and that's what I did. And I would, cut wood with my dad and my next door neighbor. I would bring it in, and I would build a fire in the stove and the fireplace, and that's it. But again, I had my own, I had fun. I don't want to say to you, because it would be untrue, that I didn't have fun. I did. I had, I can't wait to teach Malachi and Lenny and Bunny and Leah the things that I learned to do when I was a little boy, because we didn't have money for toys. So we made our toys.
Like a kite.
We made kites, and we played marbles, and we had pen knives. Malachi would love this. And I think it was a game called, Mummely de Peg. Do you know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
We all had knives because we would use them carving out sticks and to make pop guns and kites and so on. So we would keep pocket knives, and it was a game where you'd be on a wood floor, on a porch or in the house, on a wood floor, and you would open the main blade and then the small blade here, and you would flip it, and if it flipped right into the wood, then you got a point from that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In other words, the knife would stick into the floor.
Into the wood.
And I had forgotten that. I was reading a book, The Yearling, and I said to Mom, oh my God, I hadn't thought of this in 70 years. But I used to play this game because the author who wrote the book back in the 30s, she's talking about one of the characters visiting and playing this game with his buddy.
Wow.
So, and so we did all those things. We had it, and we'd make telephones out of tin cans. We would string copper wire between two tin cans, and then we would talk. I don't know if I did that with you. Did we do that when you were a kid?
We did that in New Jersey.
Did you?
When we were growing up?
Yeah. I don't know if it worked. I think it worked for us. Did it work for you? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it did.
I don't know. Anyway.
Do you remember what your parents look like?
I do. I have memories of them right in my mind. I'll take it with me, till I die, sure.
So tell me about your mom.
Well, my mom was my complexion, or maybe even darker than my complexion, with with hair texture pretty much the same as mine. I guess, yeah. But woman of natural height, but tremendous inner physical and mental strength. And that's what stays with me, just the strength of her, and how she would read to me. I remember her holding me and reading to me by the window because it wasn't dark enough to light the lamp. So she would sit by the window and just a natural light would come in, and she would read to me, from children's books and so on. Yeah.
And what about your dad?
My dad looked. He reminded me, if I had to pick who does he remind you of? I said Geronimo. He had that complexion, and he had the just straight hair, and he came from that area. He was Louisiana, Texas, that area where he grew up. And
he had Indian.
I think so. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Was he tall?
When you look at it, you know what? Everybody was tall. To me, even when you're a kid, you look up. So
Right.
everyone was tall. Was he tall? He was certainly taller than me, but I remember him as being taller than me. Yes, but not as tall as you. No, he wasn't 6 foot plus. No.
Right.
No.
And do you remember your parents being affectionate with one another? Did you see that?
I didn't see a lot of that. Parents, and I'm thinking of other parents. I don't know how much they showed that outward affection. I don't, not hugging or that sort of thing, but just there were times sitting by the fire at night, and my mom reading to him, and him sitting close to her. I could see the affection there, but not kissy.
Right.
They weren't touchy, and I don't recall any. I'm trying to look at any of my neighbors being openly touchy feely. None of them, no.
Can you talk about your siblings?
Yeah, I grew up, I had, as you know, Ida, whom you met, and but you never met Blackie.
Oh, I met Blackie.
You did? Oh, he was alive when you met
Yeah.
him. Yeah. Okay, I didn't remember that. I
Yeah.
thought the only time you met him was with his funeral.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I met him. I remember him.
Okay, so you met Ida and Blackie, but you never met. Well, you met Lucille, my oldest sister. She came to visit, but you were too young. Emily said she remembers her. She came to visit us when we were living in Brooklyn
Okay.
on Park Place. And Lucille was the oldest, very, very gentle, very, very sweet, very introverted, by the way, in contrast to Ida, who was just the opposite,
Right.
who was introverted, wanted to be into everything, wanted to manage everything, very intelligent.
Ida was older than you.
Yeah, Ida was old. Lucille was the oldest, and then Ida the next, and then Blackie, and then myself, and then my brother James, and then our oldest brother, who never lived with us, Wilfred. He was older than all of them,
Okay.
and so that was a Luckett family at Congress Street. My mom, my dad, Ida, Lucille, George, and James, and myself.
George is Blackie.
Blackie, yeah.
Do you remember why they called him Blackie?
I vaguely remember. I think because
he was a light
he was dark. Well, he was darker than Lucy and Ida, and I think that's why they called him Blackie.
But he was still relatively.
He was
light.
relatively light. Yeah. When you look at a photograph, you look at that photograph in my bedroom, and you can see he's almost as light as they are. I'm the darkest one in the family. But I think that's why they called him Blackie. Yeah.
So when you were growing up, how many of your siblings lived with you?
It was all of them were.
Except for Wilford?
But not Wilford. No, he never lived with us.
Okay.
He never lived with us. He would come visit. Just Ida, Lucille, Blackie, and James, and myself lived in that house. And most of the time, many of the time, the older siblings would go and sleep with the Johnsons, whom we were very, very close with, because the house was just so small to accommodate.
And where did
all
the Johnsons live?
Right next door. Those were Anthony's parents.
Got it.
And we rented the house from the Johnsons. The house that we lived in was given to Mr. Johnson. Let's see if I remember. I don't remember now, but maybe, I don't know if it was a wedding present from, anyway, the Johnsons owned 2 houses, one on each side of them. We rented one, and some other people that we knew well rented the other one. I think they owned both of those houses. So we were close. We were very, very close. We were closer to the Johnsons than we were to anyone in Mobile. They were the closest.
And which is why Tony or Anthony, we call him our cousin, even
Right,
though
because
he's
it's
technically not our cousin.
He's not, no.
But we...
Yeah, because of that, and because of, the relationship. His mother's daughter was raised, by my aunt, Ophelia, you know about that, and so on. But yeah, we were a close family.
Right.
And like all families, we had difficulties,
And many years later, Tony would come and live with us in Brooklyn.
That's right. You remember him taking you to Coney Island.
Absolutely.
And, to places and so on.
I remember bits and pieces of a story about something that happened with your dad when he left the family. Do you recall that, and can you talk a little bit about that, what happened?
Okay, you're talking about when my father left his family. Okay, what I know, and I don't know very much about it, is that my father, when he was a young man, ran away from home because he had a fight with his brother. He thought he had harmed him in some way. It turned out, from what we learned much later, he hadn't, but my father thought he had harmed him and he was going to be severely punished for it. So he ran away from home and never went back. And that's all we know about it. I know nothing about what happened after then. And so let me digress for a moment. When Emily was doing our ancestry, she located members of the family who knew something about that. Did she ever talk to you about that? Okay, so when she comes over this afternoon,
We'll have to talk to her.
one of the things that you want to do is talk to her about that, because one of the persons she contacted, the Lucketts, will say, oh yeah, we heard that story, and so on and so on. Maybe it can shed some light on it. Anyway, but my father did run away. And at some point he met my mother. Now again, Emily has done a great deal of research, and when she is here, she can bring out some charts. And my recollection from what she tells me is that my mom and my dad lived or worked close together in a particular town. And
That's how they met.
that's how they got together. And I'm thinking, is that then how by that time his wife had died? And see, I can't make the transition from Louisiana. And I think
So
this
your
place,
dad was married.
he was married, and that's when Ida, Lucille, and Blackie were born. So that when my mom and my dad married, she had 3 stepchildren.
Correct.
And they moved to Mobile together. And see, now my early recollection is that I'm born now right around the corner from where we lived all my life. I was born on Ann Street, which is right around the corner from Congress Street. And I'm saying, did he have the family on Ann Street and then move to Congress Street? Or what? I don't know. And why did he move there? Because my recollection of the Ann Street house is that it was a better house than the Congress Street house. But I don't know. I'm too young. I was too young to get that fixed in my mind.
Right.
So my life begins on Congress Street.
Right.
That's when, sitting in my mom's lap, or sitting on the back porch, or lying down, sleeping on a pallet as a little boy.
That's all Congress Street.
That's all Congress Street. Ann Street is either memories when I went back to go around to see, this is where I was born. Because I remember my mom introducing me to the midwife who birthed me, and she said, "This is so and so."
When your dad ran away from home, was he in Louisiana or Texas? What do you?
I think in Texas. That's what I think.
Okay.
And
and do you know, was he 15?
I don't
12?
know. I did a lot of research, but the only thing I could come up with, and I can share that with you because I have a lot of that stuff that I got with the help of the Amish when I lived on the shore. I went to them to help me research my background, my mother's background, my father's background, and they put me in touch with a lot of agencies. So I was able to get my father's, some information when he was with the Railroad Retirement Board, and his death certificate, my mom's death certificate, and a lot of other information that you can look at while you're here. And Emily can go through a lot of it because she was able to say, this person was in this census, it shows this, that, and the other,
right,
and kind of put it together. Because a lot of it's blank to me. This is why I'm so interested in trying to go back and retrieve it.
right,
Because I'm unsettled, not knowing.
Can you talk about your school years?
Yeah. I remember the earliest I remember was going to school in, what do you call it? Grade school when you're 6, 7. Elementary school. The earliest years in elementary school. And this school, the thing I remember about it, there are several things that still stand out, is that it was right behind the school was a swamp, literally a swamp, that we would play in. And this shows you how Black people grew up in those days, and this is what we were dealt with. And I told you in my neighborhood there was an infirmary where they burned all the toxic waste, and we used to play there, in our bare feet and that sort of thing. I'm wondering, in retrospect, while I'm still alive, why? Why am I dead? Anyway, this school, I remember the school. I remember just one teacher that I see in my mind, and I remember learning fairly well up until a point, but I remember not being able to hear very well. And I kind of knew that there was something wrong with my hearing, because my mother and my aunt would say something periodically, and they would reference my hearing. So I knew but I didn't. I was too young to say, "Oh, I have a hearing disability."
This was when you were in elementary
Yeah,
school.
I became aware of it then. It later went away, by the way, this awareness, and then it didn't come back until a college classmate made me aware of it. But anyway, in school, in elementary school, I remember kind of not getting it. And so rather than asking, repeat this, or would you do that, embarrassing myself, I kind of retreated inward. And I kind of withdrew from learning. And this went on for a year or two. My mom and dad worked, I told you that. So they would leave. My mom would go to work, my dad would go to work, my mom would go to work. They leave me, and I'm to go to school.
By yourself?
Yes. I wouldn't go to school.
And how far was the school from your house?
It was walking distance. I would walk. It was everything was walking distance of my grade school, my high school. How far was it? Let's see, maybe 8 or 10 blocks. 10 blocks maybe. But for a boy, that's nothing. 10 blocks is nothing. 10 blocks.
But even though
it wasn't my fear or not of walking or anything. It's just that being embarrassed that I couldn't keep up, and they would ask me a question I couldn't answer it, and I'm embarrassed. Some way, I don't know how, but my mother found out about it. My parents found out about it.
That you weren't going to school.
That I wasn't going on. And they said, "This is unacceptable. We both work. We can't trust you to leave you here." And they couldn't. I wouldn't get in trouble. I would stay. Oh, maybe the Johnsons told them Howard didn't go to school because I sat on the porch all day, and I would swing. We had a swing, and I would just swing. I wasn't a bad child,
right?
And I would swing, and then they would say, "Well, why didn't Howard go to school?" Or something like that. I was the neighbor. They found out, and then they said, "We're going to send you to boarding school." So they sent me to a boarding school.
How old were you when you went to boarding school?
I finished the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade there. I went to boarding school for 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, where was boarding school?
It was a distance from Mobile. I don't remember. I'm going to say it was maybe, thinking in the driving time that it would take to get there, maybe 15 or 20 miles from Mobile. So that there was no way of me getting back unless the priest would bring me back.
This was a Catholic?
This was a Catholic boarding school. Yeah.
Was it all boys?
No, it was a co-ed. It was co-ed.
Okay.
It was co-ed.
What are your recollections of that? Fun time?
It was both. It was fun time, and it was both. Mostly it was both. I can't. If I say mostly positive, mostly negative, I'm going to say it was mostly positive. There were a lot of good things there, bad things there. The good things there were. It was a very, very sheltered environment, and it was kids need what is the word I want to need? They need
structure.
Structure. It was a very structured environment, which is what I needed, and certainly the priests and the nuns provided that. I became so enamored of Catholicism while I was there because we'd have to go to Mass every morning, and of course all the high holy days and so on. And so I sing in the choir, and I learn how to serve Mass. And the only thing I didn't like about this, that they'd sing in Gregorian chants, and I never liked Gregorian chants. To this day, it just is so otherworldly, and I just didn't like it. But it was part of it. But in addition to going to school, we had chores. We farmed with the priest. We helped him with the animals and building a new building, a convent for the nuns. So we had to work, and we went to school. I was part of it. We paid very little because my parents couldn't, but we worked, and we got all of our food, of course, and lodging and so on. And that was good because I befriended, I trapped a pet squirrel that I would smuggle into class with me, and I got away with it for quite a long time. One day something happened. I was answering a question, and the squirrel crawled from out of my jacket, and the nun goes, "Get that thing out of here, don't bring it back," and that sort of thing, But the squirrel would sleep with me,
Wow.
Yeah. I trapped him. I slept on the second floor, and there was a roof right there. So I rigged up. The squirrel would always come up. So I said, I can rig up a little box here thing. And the squirrel would go in, the box fell on it.
Right.
So I got him, and I petted him, and he became my best friend.
Wow. And you actually thought about becoming a priest.
I did. But I want to tell you, one of the things that excited me about being there is all of the things we were able to do. We had particular chores. One of my chores was to work in the mail room. So I had to, and the trains didn't make stops unless I flagged it down. If someone wanted to travel to and fro, Mobile or beyond, the train wouldn't stop unless I got out there with the flag.
You stood like on the station platform?
Yes, exactly, on the tracks, and not on the platform, on the tracks.
That was your job?
Yeah, and I would flag the train down.
And you were a kid?
Yeah, I would do that, I would say. And the train would stop. And I want to tell you some of the crazy things that kids will do. But that wasn't crazy, that was fine. That was all done. And the train could see you from afar. I mean, and you don't stand there and the train comes. You get out of the way,
right.
Stand on the platform, and then the train would throw the mail. It would throw the mail off the track. That was another thing that I would do. So anyway, my job was the train, when it's passing through, no one is on the platform going away. They would throw the mail bags down they're just on the ground. So I would grab the mail bags, drag them into the directory where the little quote post office was, and then help the priest's assistant sort the mail. That was my job. So that was cool. I like that. But on my fun time, I and other kids, there was a trestle that the train had to go across. A trestle, and there's a huge gorge.
Right.
We would see the train coming either way, and we knew the train wasn't going to stop. So we would play and say, okay, let's see if we can beat this train before it reaches a trestle. Because if it reached the trestle while we're there, we can't get off.
Done.
So this train is barrel-assing toward us, and we're saying, okay, who's going to go? And we would do this, and we would play that. And of course, I survived, we survived. But another thing I did, I want to tell you, crazy thing. There was the priest had his pet. It was a huge horse. It looked like a Trojan horse. A big, huge mule. And I've forgotten his name now. But, you never, ever slap a mule on the left side or wrong side. So I think it was bully. Was that a bull or a mule that I hit? Well, there was two. He had a bull, a pet bull, and a horse. And I used to, when the bull was small, I used to wrestle with them with his horns. And I could really turn him over because he was small enough and I was strong enough. A young boy, I was a Malachi. I could turn him over, But when he got older, it was another thing. Anyway, the horse. Once the horse, I would try to ride him. I wanted to ride him in the worst place. He's a big horse. So I would be on, I don't know, it was a feed platform, John, where they would load the feed. It's not on the ground, it's a platform, because I couldn't reach the horse from the ground. It was too big. But if I'm on the platform and the horse comes up to eat some of the feed,
right,
then I can get on him.
Right.
So he just would never let me approach him. One day I decided, okay, here's a good, I'm giving him some feed. So I jumped on his back, and the priestess told him, don't bother this horse. Don't do it. So I got on the horse. The horse took off. He didn't head into a field or anything, but he headed to his barn where there's a door, and I'm on top of it.
Oh, no.
So he goes into the barn and finds some way. I grabbed the top of the barn before I was beheaded. And then when he ran into the barn, I managed to drop down. And then the next time, the other encounter I had with him, he was in the field eating, minding his business. So I went up on his left side and I said, hey, bully, or something. I whacked him on his behind, and he kicked with all his might. And he hit me right here. And I went tumbling back there. And I was limping for weeks. And if he had hit me here, of course he would have killed me. And I had one other encounter with him. We were bringing some lumber home from some place. And I sat on the back, and he was spooked by a train. Oh, we crossed the track. Oh, just the track itself. The cart crossed the track and it rattled, and he got spooked and he took off. And so I'm just holding on to the what is it? The rail, what do you call it? The axle.
Yeah.
I survived. But anyway, I just wanted to tell you about those things.
Did your parents, were they able to visit you?
No, I visited them.
How often? Do you remember?
Well, the priest would go in. I'm thinking now in retrospect that he would, because he was running a boarding school for poor, black, and orphan children. That's what we were, black orphan children. That he could get rations free of charge from food bank. That's retrospect. Sometime if we were good, I guess so I was good at some time.
He would take you.
You could go home and do that, and I could stop in and see my parents that way. I don't recall them ever coming up. They may have. I don't recall. Maybe someone drove them up once. I don't recall, but I remember that going in with them and come back, and we putting stuff away and everything like that.
You said it was mostly good. Do you remember one or two stories of things that were bad?
Yeah, the priest slapped me once, and it turned me against him. But I don't know, I did something, and I don't remember what I did. I said something, maybe it was a smart aleck, Or I may have said something to, he had his assistant, her name was Victoria. She was a Cajun. She was very, very fair. And she wore her hair in two long plaits, plaits, there you call them, plaits, we call them. She was very, very fair. She may have ticked me off or something. I just smart, and she told Father Grassi, that was his name, Grassi, and he slapped me, and he told me not to ever don't you ever do that again, don't you ever say that again, something. That's what I think, I remember. And I never forgave him for that. And I never liked him, and I never respected him after that. Yeah.
He was white.
He was white. The nuns were all white. There were no black adults employed there. It was just the only employee that he had was Victoria. We called her Miss Vicky. I remember the priest's son coming to visit once, and he rode a motorcycle, and we all, liked him because he would ride us around on his motorcycle. That was cool. And he would say, I'm going up to Mount Vernon, and he may have taken some of the older boys with them on his motorcycle. I never went. I just rode around the campus there on his motorcycle. But we thought he was cool, But I didn't like the priest after that.